All right, welcome back for part two of the 66 Nova of Holder Motorsports. Got that cherry bomb color done, and I've already prepped the front end. Now we're ready to put on, ready to mask everything off for our actual headlights and grille and bumper. So everything's been sanded with 600 grit, a little bit of wet sand, a little bit of dry sanding. All the front end stuff was used. We used a gray scuff pad with some sand and paste. So everything's nice and sanded. So it has some real good adhesion. And I'm gonna go ahead and get this all masked out so we can get ready to move on with the silver. All right, so as you can see, I've got everything masked off that's gonna be staying the original color. All the stuff exposed is gonna be our chrome. Normally I do the silver very first. The first thing I do, I normally do the silver because I like to be able to clear coat it and then sand it smooth and then work on top of it. But with this being the red tinted clear coat on top of this color, I was unable to do that. It was gonna have to be two steps regardless of how you look at it. So we're gonna do the silver, and then I'm gonna actually put down a color blender, VWM500. It also contains a little bit of a hardener in it. And so we're going to put all our silver down, and then we're going to put the VWM500 on top and let that dry good. And that'll give you a good solid surface to work on top of, similar to having a clear coat on top of. Now the silver I'm using is 8986 in the Nexa Aquabase system. It's a fine bright silver. I always use a fine bright or medium bright or a medium fine. There's three silvers right there in the middle that'll work just fine for trying to make it look like chrome. The fine bright just happens to be what I used on this particular car, and so I don't actually have the car with the rear bumper here now, but I know the rear bumper has 8986 on it, so we're going to do the same thing in the front end, just like I did the first time around. So we'll get 3 coats or so until we get good coverage over this, and then we'll start putting that VWM500 on so that we can let everything dry out real good before we start doing all our masking to make our grille and our headlights and everything look real. So. Alright, so from here on out it's going to be a lot of time-lapse footage and just me talking. So I can understand if you want to skip on to the end and see the finished product, but if you're trying to do this on your own, just be patient with me. Trying to give you all as much footage as I can. Now here I'm shooting my base coat with my Iwata Intech 1.3 using 24 psi when the trigger's fully pulled. Just trying to make sure I get good coverage. I'm not too concerned with like metallic orientation. Just need to get it on there. We're going to be doing a lot of other work on top of it, so you wouldn't know if it was blotchy anyway. Alright, I got my 3 coats of silver on. Now it's time for the VWM500. We're going to put 2 coats of this on top, and we're going to let this thing dry overnight. Alright, so the silver's on, everything's good and dry. Now we gotta cover our bumper up. We're gonna leave the centerpiece exposed because that's gonna be black, as in there's nothing there. We're gonna cover the headlight area up for now. We're gonna go ahead and tape out our main grille lines. We're basically covering everything up that we want to remain silver so that we can actually do our background, and we're going to use a dark gray to create anything that would be like black plastic. So we'll get this stuff covered up and then we'll keep on rolling. Alright, so here I'm just using some regular 3M green masking tape to tape off the border where what would be the open space of the bumper. Now you could use fine line in this area if you wanted to, but I typically don't, just because it's such a tight turn in some places, and the fine line I'm using at this point in time, it doesn't turn that well. So some masking tape, and I'm actually using a razor blade to cut the little corners out in there that you can't really see, just to make sure they turn as they're supposed to. Alright, so what I'm doing here is I'm actually masking off the bumper as its own separate entity. It's going to be the last thing I mess with, so I want to tape it off as it's one single unit, so that way when I'm masking and covering the areas of the headlight and the grille up, that I don't have to worry about pulling any tape off on accident. So it'll stay completely covered until about the very end. Alright, now I'm beginning to lay out the horizontal stripes. I'm using a 1/4 inch FBS fine line tape. This is the orange version, which is kind of a medium stiffness. They've got multiple different types of tape, and this is the most versatile one I found, and the one I like the most. Alright, so now that the grille is actually taped out, I'm going to go ahead and mask off the lower trim, the hood trim, and a couple little pieces along the edge between the headlight bezel there and the grille. Alright, so now that that's taken care of, I'm actually cutting the grille lines around those front emblems. So making it appear as though the grille is behind them, and and they're attached to one of those horizontal bars. And then I'm covering up the Chevy 2, because I've actually got a Chevy 2 stencil to make that look as it should. And then I'm covering up the SS to protect it, because it's going to remain silver as well. Alright, so I got everything masked off. Next up, what we're going to be doing is putting down our dark gray to simulate the vertical sides of what would be your grille sections. So we're going to put down dark gray. Then we're going to cover all of those stuff up that's going to remain dark gray. And we're going to go in and we're going to actually black out these lower bumper holes. And then we'll black out on top of our grille to create that void, that space of nothingness. Alright, so a couple quick coats of gray. Now I'll leave a formula in the description of this. What I'm using here is DBC. I'm using just black and white mixed together.
Now I'm doing this in the DBC system over top of that VWM500 because once you've put solvent down, you cannot go back and use a waterborne base coat on top of it. You can put that solvent base on top of some waterborne base coat, but you can't put waterborne on top of the solvent base. Now here I am actually marking out my vertical lines. I'm using 1/8 inch FBS orange again. And I've got about a 4-inch wide border going on. I've made me a little template there just so I can quickly repeat the process as I go along. Alright, now that the 1/8 inch vertical lines are made, I've got the 1/4 inch tape again, and I'm going to the right side of all the vertical lines heading towards what is my right, and then I'm going to come over here and do the left side of the lines on my left. Now what this is creating is the vertical black plastic pieces that are holding that grill together. So the 1/8 inch line represents the face of it, and the 1/4 inch wide line is going to represent that little bit you're going to see from that side view. I know this might seem kind of weird, but the reason I'm doing all this taping in this order is because we're going to be pulling certain pieces off in a reverse order to create that look as if there's something real in there. It's hard to pick up on camera, it's hard to pick up in the pictures, but when you see it in real life, you can actually see what I'm creating. Now, a couple quick coats of black. You'll notice I put a little border on each side just to represent kind of a flat black piece of plastic that you might find on the sides of some of these grills. Alright, now it's time to lay out the headlights. Now I'm using the Gerber masking stencil here that I've had cut out from the local sign shop. So at first I'm putting down the circle to give me that actual perfect view of where the headlight's going to be, and then I'm putting in the outer ring that I'm going to be using to mask off the outer section as I work on the inside of the actual headlight.
Alright, so fast forward a little bit. As you can see, I've got my black down. You watched me put the gray down, and then I actually made my vertical lines. Now, I started from the center with an 1/8 inch vertical, and then I spaced out, it's about 4 inches each way, so you can still see my 1/8 inch vertical lines. I've already peeled off the 1/4 inch lines beside it. So if you notice everything going to this side of the car, there is a gray line that's exposed on each side of the black 1/8 inch tape.
Alright, so I froze it. If you look in the center of the screen where that gray stripe is, just to the left of it, you'll see the impression of that 1/8 inch tape. And so what I'm doing is pulling the 1/4 inch off, and I'm going to do some shading before I pull the 1/8 inch off, and that's what's going to create that side shadow on that vertical bar.
Right there. So on this side, everything is exposed on the opposite side. So it's as if you're looking at the car coming in this way. You would see the side of the little vertical pieces that are holding the horizontal grill section together. Now I've already kind of taped this up. I've got my headlights ready to go. So we're going to go ahead and get started on those. Typically want to do everything as if you're going to see some of the side of the car in this view. So we're bringing our light source in here, so we're going to actually we're going to create kind of a spot where our light bulb would be, or the actual center. So we're going to darken this section here up to that point, and then we're going to darken some coming back this way, and then we're going to turn around with white
And we're gonna go the opposite. We're gonna lighten everything up, bringing it up in here and then back this way just a little bit. And what we're trying to do is make somewhat of that dish shape. And then we're gonna go in here and we're gonna do all of our lines to make it look like the outside of the grid network that you always see on an old school sealed beam light. Alright, so I've got my Wada HPC airbrush, and we're going to go through here and do what I was talking about. We're going to start with the black, and we're just going to kind of make some curvatures going in there. Now you'll notice that where I'm kind of stopping is high of the center of the circle, because when I create the light bulb, the part where the actual light bulb would be, I'm doing that up high because you're going to be looking down at the front end, and so it would appear as though it's kind of higher up in the circle than if you were looking at it straight on. Alright, so I switched over to white, and now I'm going to start kind of brighten up some areas in the same manner as I was using the black. Alright, now that that's taken care of, I'm going to actually start doing the grid network on the front. So my first center vertical line, this is 1/8 inch FBS tape. The first middle one is actually straight up and down, but I'm actually creating some curvature in them as I go out to the sides to help give a little bit of that 3D look to it. Now my horizontal lines, I'm going to do pretty much the same thing. The first one is straight across, nice and level. I'm using 3/4 tape as my spacer, and then I'm putting a little bit of curve to them as I go down. Alright, now here I'm laying out the different squares that you might see if you look at a typical like Sylvania sealed beam headlight. There are certain blocks that are a little bigger than others, so I'm going to create all that using the tape and the razor blade, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing for the other side since both headlights are identical. Alright, now that all that's taped out, I'm going to go through here. I've got my airbrush with my white in it, And first thing I'm going to be doing here is brightening up where that light bulb's going to be, and you can tell I'm kind of high as center, creating that little glow there. And then I'm going to brighten up some of these other areas. Seems I lost my clip of doing the black, so with the black I kind of went over the same areas that I did originally, and then also kind of went all the way around the headlight to darken the outer section of it. Alright, time for the tedious process of pulling all that masking off, especially all those little tiny squares that get left over from cutting everything. Alright, so sometimes it's kind of a pain to map this out in your head on how you're going to do it all, so I kind of forgot that I wanted to darken up around that ring, or the outer part of the headlight as well, before I unmasked it. So here I'm put some tape back on it, and I'm going to go around the edges of it with black to help darken up the grid and to kind of darken up a little bit of that top part of the headlight. So now it's time to actually cover the headlight up, and we're going to pull that outer masking off, and we're going to start to create our trim rings. So what I'm doing is taking that 1/4 inch fine line and I'm going around the Gerber masking stencil. And so my first lap there is just kind of a guide, and then my second lap is going to actually be what I'm going to use to mask it off. So I'm going to get around here, and then I'm going to actually pull that first piece off to expose the inner part, which is going to be our trim ring. Alright, so now that that's done, I'm just going to go around. I'm going to touch it with a little bit of black in some areas, all the way around it. And then I'm going to come back with my white and catch a few little spots on the lower sides, on the left and right side, just to kind of give it a little gleam to it, kind of make it look like it may be shining. Alright, so at this point I've covered up the trim rings with the headlights as well. And I'm going through and I'm blacking out those gray vertical lines. I'm giving them some depth. So I'm shadowing along the horizontal portions as well as the vertical portions where the 1/8 inch lines are. I know it's kind of hard to explain this, and it's obviously you can't really see. If you've ever watched me do the 68 or 69 Camaro grille on the orange candy car or the Peruvian ice car, I believe you can see what I'm doing a lot better. It's the exact same principle. Right there on the side, you can see where I'm darkening it up, where I have that one piece of plastic border I created. And then I'm going to shade in some of the dish sections and the darker parts of that SS emblem, and as well as do a little touching around the headlight bezel area to darken it up in some areas where it would naturally be dark and help give it some depth. Alright, so now that that's taken care of, I'm going to go through and pull these 1/8 inch vertical lines off to expose what's going to be the face of those little borders. So all these will come off, and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to shade just along the horizontal portions of them, just to kind of give them a little bit of setback from the horizontal, chrome parts. Now I know it doesn't look like it, but there is a stencil where that Chevy 2 is showing. So what I'm going to be doing here is doing a little bit of darkening and detailing around those letters and that border. That way when I expose that part, it'll have a little bit of extra depth behind the letters. Alright, so now you're starting to see what it's really going to be looking like. I'm pulling off all those horizontal lines and getting those letters off of the Chevy 2 emblem and exposing everything. Alright, so now all that's exposed and it's time for a little bit of extra shadowing in some places just to kind of help give it some depth in its natural dark spots. Alright, so now it's time to expose that front bumper. So we can do a little bit of darkening in some areas on it. And pulling off the masking over top of the headlight. Alright, so I realized I kind of goofed up and pulled that tape off too early around that headlight. So I'm going to remask around the trim ring and cover up the edge of that headlight so I can actually do some shading around it, which I forgot. Alright, now it's time to do some more shading. I'm going to darken up the upper portion of the headlight to help create a little bit of a shadow on top of it, since those those fender moldings stick out so far. And then I'm just going to sit here and do a little darkening in a lot of these natural areas of the bumper just to kind of emphasize that depth. Alright, so once I'm done with the black doing some shading, I'm going to go through here with, I've actually got white in my other airbrush, and I'm actually creating little highlights on that face of the headlight. You can see the little white dots appearing on the face of the headlight, and then you're going to see them going across the grille and a little bit on the a little bit on the emblem, just as if, you know, that light's got that little gleam to it. So just a few of those here and there, and some sharp corners and such, just to help give the appeal that there's light shining off of it. Alright, so now everything's unmasked. We are ready to put clear coat on. So I'll give you just a quick look before we clear it. You can see those them white highlights a lot better now, and the way these shadows on these trim pieces kind of give it that added depth.
Alright, so I'm finished up with the 66 Nova Holder Motorsports. Got the front end done, makes everything look nice and real. And a couple things I wanted to note about this. I know I did a time lapse on it, so it was probably a little difficult trying to understand everything that's going on. I'm not sure how much of the how much information I've got in there, but I'm gonna go over a little bit of this after the fact to kind of tell you a little bit of what's going on. Now, one thing to point out with the Chevy 2 and the SS, now some of these front ends have, some of the front ends are kind of they're molded in. So as you can see, this is a molded in SS, and it's stuck out as a Chevy 2. It sticks out kind of like the real emblem would. Now originally in this front end, whoever made this front end, they had molded it in really nice where it said Chevy 2 and had the nice little fine lines in there just like the actual emblem did. But after painting over it one time, that stuff was disappearing after trying to sand it again, so I was going to lose the detail in it, so I ended up making the Chevy 2 and going back and just making my own. I did use the original SS as they had it molded, but sometimes it can be kind of difficult to deal with the 3D part. It's almost easier, especially anybody knows done any airbrushing. It's easier to do it when it's flat and just kind of make it your own, make it look 3D. So it looks a little off. You know, sometimes I'd prefer just to grind those off and make my own where it's nice and flat, but turned out pretty good. The headlights I've done 10 different ways. This way is seems to work out pretty nice. You know, those are 1/8 inch lines, and as you can see in the time lapse, I put a little bit of curvature in them. Probably could have put a little more, and that's because this is a flat surface. Some of these front ends will actually be molded out like an original headlight, and so when you're doing your lines, you can actually kind of make that. It makes itself. It gives its own 3D design already. Now in the bumper, you can see there's some darker spots where I went through and I kind of darkened it up just to help bring the focus. Even though the bumper is the correct shape, I wanted to kind of bring to focus some of the darker areas, just to kind of make it, emphasize it, being something there that's the actual shape and real. And because it's not chrome, it's not going to have that dark kind of side cast to it. Now in the bezels here, you know, I darken it up down in the bottom corners where it's dished in. Same thing up in the upper area there. On the grill, it's probably not an exact factory 66 Nova grill, but it's a race car. We don't, you know, we're not trying to recreate some restoration here. So I did add a little border here on the end, which I believe the 66 or 67 had. The little vertical bars in there to, you know, obviously it's what holds it there. You know, in some cases, I've kind of not done any bars just to kind of give it a billet look. You know, you can kind of do what you want to do as long as it's going to look good. Now in the center hole here, the guys that went in and made all this stuff here, originally where the hole was here, they had done a nice piece of carbon, and I just sanded and cleared it. So I did the same thing here. It's a nice, perfect piece of carbon. They didn't damage anything on the outside. So I was able to just go in here and just re-clear it so that it all kind of stays nice and shiny. And now obviously there's a few little white highlights here and there to kind of emphasize a little gleam on everything. But as you can see, I don't put a whole lot of detail into these. I mean, you can get buck wild with it if you want to, but it's not always necessary. You know, KISS, the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. That tends to be the best policy when it comes to stuff like this. You know I didn't put the bumper bolts on it, which, you know, last time around I actually forgot to put them on this car. And this time around I just decided not to do it, you know, just to keep it nice and clean. You know, like I say, you don't have to get crazy with them. They still look awesome as hell. You know, just doing a little bit of work just to make some things look kind of real, but you don't have to get crazy with them. So hopefully y'all learned a little something. If you did, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and tap that bell, and I'll catch you around next time.